Hello everyone, welcome to the latest video. Today we have a new topic, but before I start, thank you for all of those of you who have been watching. This Week in the Field is a series that we're doing talking about my jobs, pricing, and the struggles and successes that I have in each week. This specific week, we're not talking about this episode is not This Week in the Field, but if you guys haven't checked those out, be sure to check those out to get a better idea of my pricing structures and things like that. A couple episodes of those are out. Last time in this specific series where I talk about the history and how to run a business or run my business, how I run my business, not necessarily how you should run yours, but just to get an idea of what you could do differently or the same as what I do. Last time I talked about how I became a handyman. Essentially, the process of what my history is with in the trades, and then actually becoming a handyman, and how that happened. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is some of how exactly I started getting jobs and some of my earlier jobs. It is a very interesting thing because if you watched the last episode, I explained that I'm not exactly a people person. I have no problem interacting with people. I have no problem, as my wife would say, charming people when I need to, but it's not something that I look forward to doing. And because of that, it's very difficult for me to try to figure out how to talk to people. One of the things that I have an issue with is staring at this camera, for example, because it's not something that I don't like direct eye contact. And while that's not necessarily eye contact, my eyes travel all over the place. It's just how I am. Years ago, I mentioned in the last episode that I used to have a podcast. Didn't have to worry about video with that because it was just audio. And because of that podcast, I talked to people, but I didn't have to worry about making eye contact because we weren't on, we weren't on video calls and things like that exist now. I haven't done that for a while, but that being said, it is something that I'm interested in. I do actually like the forming of a community and things like that. So the reason, as I've said, that I'm doing these videos is to try to help people who were in my predicament or in my situation and try to get them to better understand how you can go about doing your business. Now, like I said, I'm not telling you this is 100% the right way for you, the 100% wrong way for you. You guys have to make that decision. But the more accounts you have of different people saying how they did something gives you more ideas on how you can tailor it towards your specific needs. One of the things that I specifically have to always focus on is being around for my family. My wife works a very nice job, but she works an hour plus driving distance away from our house. Because of that, she's not able to be around to pick up the kids from activities and things like that. And while my kids are not necessarily, super active with things, they are all in activities. My oldest plays football, my youngest plays football, and my daughter plays flag football, but she's also in a bunch of activities within school too, like chorus and things like that. So there has to be a way for one of us, my wife or I, to get our kids. So when I created this business, the intention was to create it in a way where I could make my own schedule and have the ability to have time. Now, I don't have to make anywhere near as much money as somebody who would be supporting their entire family. So that I need to say that right away, so that you understand my perspective when it comes to how I go about doing my business. I am not the sole breadwinner of our household, and because of that, I don't need to worry about bringing home enough money to support our entire family, pay our mortgage, and do everything that needs to be done when it comes to paying bills. That is not something that everybody has the luxury of doing. But because of that, that also means that my wife, who has a good job, she makes money, contributes to the house just as much as I do. However, because of what we do, I have the ability, and I created this specific business with the intention of being able to make my own hours and be able to accommodate for those things that my kids were in. Part of that comes from, if you watched the last video, I was working from home on a completely separate business for about 8 to 9 years before I specifically started this business. And that business, not related to home services at all, was a completely sitting in front of a computer, doing things in front of a computer, and that's what it was. And that job, it worked out fine. It worked perfectly for when my kids were really small, but my entire intention was that when my kids were in school full time, to get out of the house and not be at the house anymore. I didn't want to be working from home anymore. And that's why I came up with the idea of doing this specific handyman business, which I talked about in the last video. Now, I specifically am focusing on that because when I first started the business, technically my youngest son was not in school full time. He was 4 years old at the time, and he only was in school for about a half a day. It wasn't even really a half a day, but essentially, I would drop him off at 8 in the morning, and someone had to get him by, I think it was 11:15. I can't remember because it was obviously a little bit of time ago. It was about 5 years ago, but I had to get him by about 11:15, and because of that, someone had to be around. And then obviously, once I picked up my son, unless I wanted to go the route of childcare, I needed to be around to be able to, watch him, monitor him. It wasn't like I was about to take my son out to job sites and things like that. My 4-year-old son, it wasn't going to happen. So that's important to note specifically because when I created the business, the intention was to create the business in a way where, again, I can make my own schedule and make it work. So in the very beginning of when I created the business, a lot of the jobs that I initially was taking on was for the first 6 months that I was doing work. This was technically before we were actually a registered business. I was taking on small little things here and there, trying to just essentially dip my foot in the water or try to get an idea of what I would need. I was doing the exact same very small jobs that I was always doing before in previous positions that I had working for other people, but I was trying to figure out what would I need more than just a basic tool set. How far would I have to drive? Figuring out ways of like getting my name out there without doing anything else. I wasn't marketing or advertising, and I had no problem admitting for that first 6 months I was essentially a chuck in a truck, which is that saying that nobody really likes when they're in this industry, but that is exactly what I was, because I was purposefully just trying to build my skill set and try to play trial and error with what I was doing. So some of the very first jobs that I had were family-based projects, and I don't suggest doing that if you're established because it just doesn't work out. But when I say family-based, I mean people that I know, whether they be family members or friends, they would either have somebody that they knew that needed work done, or they themselves needed work done. So the convenient aspect of doing something like that is that people they know going in that you're not, a business. You are somebody who's looking for work. I can tell you very quickly, I really, really did not like that persona of just being someone who needed work. The business that I had prior, I could make just as much as I was making when I first initially started it as the handyman business. I was trying to make this business work and obviously grow it because the other business wasn't really scalable to a way that would make a lot of sense. The problem is that you get that perception, people get that perception that you're just looking for work, so they're going to give you things to do that maybe you're not comfortable with doing, or maybe a typical person would charge an exorbitant amount more money for, and you don't really have a lot of options if you're just trying to do what I was doing, which is learn and basically build your knowledge base. So I remember distinctly one of the very first jobs I had was a friend of my mother had a relative who needed just some minor things done, like a railing reinforced, a small drywall patch. I think there was maybe a light fixture that needed to be replaced. It was very small stuff. I remember distinctly, this was like the very first job that I actually did. And at the time, I had to do it on the weekend because that was the only time that I actually had where I didn't have to be, watching one of my kids and my wife was available. There was no real issues with this job. It all went smoothly for the most part. The only thing that was unfortunate was I had to go do a return trip because I was unprepared when it came to certain things. I also had the mindset that you have to do an estimate for everything and you need to be on site to do an estimate. This specific job was a solid 40 minutes away from my location, and going there to do an estimate 40 minutes away for work that was like maybe a couple $100 total is not the best idea. But you live and you learn, and that is something that I've done a lot of. I've done a lot of living and I've done a lot of learning when it comes to how to make things work and make things work better. And I did an estimate, came back I think a week later to do the work, and it went smoothly. The only thing that was a hiccup was that customer was not a return customer, because for very early on, a lot of the customers that I was working for were elderly customers. They were people who didn't have a lot of money, so that's why they weren't looking for full businesses to do the work. It wasn't that they were looking for poor quality, that's not it at all, but they didn't have the money to pay, a business to come out and take care of something like just tightening up a handrail or swapping out a quick light fixture or something like that. So that's something that you have to keep in mind, is that your customer base is gonna probably adjust as you go on. And we can talk about customer bases and how that changes in a different video, but specifically I want to talk about the early on jobs. So that was one of the early jobs. One of the other jobs that I did was I ended up doing a project for my cousin. They had some water dam. They had some ice damming in a valley, and then there was some water that got through into their attic, and their ceiling in their kitchen got damaged. That was part of the project. That was actually, I think that was the initial thing that brought the project on. But they were about to have a kid at the time, and they had a door. They have one main bath up by their bedrooms that is shared for the three bedrooms. They're on the top floor, and there was a door that would open up into their master bedroom, but it took up wall space. That door took up available wall space in their room, and it also, they didn't necessarily want a door going from the bathroom into their master bedroom once they had kids. So essentially the job was to take out the door, frame out a wall, drywall it, mud it, or tape and mud it, paint it, add in trim, and then there was doing a ceiling, or not ceiling, there was doing a wall mount for a television that was supposed to be on that wall where the door was. And that was essentially the entire job. The other part of it was the water damage, and it was essentially taking out what needed to be and trying to float it. Now, I do not like doing drywall, and this project is probably one of the main reasons I don't like doing drywall. Now, I've done plenty of drywall work when it comes to ceilings and walls. I prefer walls. Ceilings, I don't know what it is about ceilings, but I have had a lot of difficulty trying to float ceilings very well, to the point of, unless it's a very small thing and I explain to them that I am not somebody who is the best option for this, I try to stay away from ceilings. I've done this, I had one last year, and then I had another one the year before that I distinctly remember. But for the most part, I tried to stay away from ceilings. But this project, it was such a huge length of damage that, to be honest, in the grand scheme of things and knowing what I know now, it probably would have just been better to rip out that piece of drywall, rip out the piece of drywall right next to it, replace both pieces of drywall, and start fresh with the fresh, tape and mud. The issue is that right above there is an attic, and the attic had insulation in it that was blown, so you're talking about a much bigger project than just simple. They were looking for a simple quick fix. To this day, when I go over to their house and I look at that spot, I am not pleased with how it turned out. He knows that I'm not pleased, but it was better. It does look better than it did. There's no water stains and things like that, and he knows what needs to be done if he actually wants it to be completely repaired. But the issue is that it's those little things that as you progress as a handyman, if you are a good person, you're probably going to care about how your stuff looks. You're going to care about how the condition that you're leaving things in. Are you leaving it better than it was? That's something that always bugs me. When I get customers who are looking for a dirt cheap option, I understand that that's what they're looking for. I understand that ultimately what they want is something that's very budget friendly. Sometimes I tell them that, like, I'm not the best option for that because I don't like leaving something in a manner that I wouldn't want for myself. And I'm not trying to sit here and say that I am an expert when it comes to certain things. There's just certain things that I don't believe it should be left a certain way. I always clean up after myself. I have a vacuum that I drive around with on a regular basis and a broom to make sure that I can sweep up even the slightest bit of dust when I go to a customer's house, because I don't want to leave a mess. When I've hired contractors in the past, one of the biggest complaints that I had about them, or complaints that I've heard other people say, is that the contractors leave a mess and they don't clean anything up. And that's not, I'm trying to, I'm trying to give a professional perception of my business, and you are not professional if you're leaving messes and leaving potentially safety hazards and things like that. You don't want to leave screws on the floor or screws anywhere sticking out of a wall that are not, that somebody could touch or get scratched on, or, worse. So anyway, that job, it took a long time. But at the time it was more of like, I wasn't charging by the hour by any means. I wasn't even charged. All I did, because they were family, was said if I needed specific tools, they pay for all the materials. And then if I need specific things to actually do the work, they pay for those things. I think ultimately, I can't remember exactly, but I want to say it was like $600. But I was there for a couple of months doing various different things when it came to this. My cousin at the time, he had messed up his leg, and because he messed up his leg, he wasn't able to do a lot of this stuff. Otherwise, he was probably going to end up doing some of this stuff himself. So for them, it was a good situation because they didn't have to pay someone full price or even half price to do what they wanted me to do. To be honest, the wall turned out very well. That we did by closing in the master bedroom, separating from the bathroom. The wall turned out very well. There was a couple of other projects at the time that got added, like painting another room. But it was also a good time for me to learn how to do certain things, and also learn what I could need to have in order to complete certain tasks. I'm going to say this a lot as I talk about a variety of different things, but I am the type of person where if I know for a fact a tool will make me more efficient, and I'm not only going to use the tool once, meaning I'm not going to use the tool and I'm never going to use it again. The intention is I'm buying this tool because, at least the way I plan it out, is that I will use this tool multiple times and get my money's worth out of it. So ultimately, that is what I will do. I will spend money on tools. There are a lot of tools that I have used once. There's a lot of tools I've used 2-3 times and they sit there. And there's a lot of tools where I've used it once and it sat there for such a long time that I've decided it's never going to be used again, and I sell it because I have no advantage of holding on to something, especially when I have other things that I would be more useful. When I first started out, I did some landscaping stuff, and I say landscaping lightly because it was like I would trim some bushes, trim some trees. I didn't cut grass, but I would, if something was overgrown, I could weed whip it down. I don't do any of that stuff anymore. I think about a year ago, I had a job where a tree had fallen at a property, rental property that I worked for the property manager, and they needed the tree chopped up. So I chopped up that tree and got rid of the trunk of the tree. But outside of that, I haven't done anything related to landscaping in quite some time. To the point that some of the landscape stuff that I have, I would probably just get rid of. And I probably should, to be honest. But there has been other things that the original vacuum that I had, I ended up selling that vacuum because I wanted a different type of vacuum that was not needing to be plugged in, a battery powered vacuum. The one that I carry in my truck is battery powered, but a bigger one, I've ran into a problem where I didn't always have the access to power, where I'd have to run an extension cord to two rooms over in order to get electric to be able to vacuum stuff up. So I switched over to a battery one. But all of that being said, the first 6 months was essentially, how do I figure out how to make this work and learn what I need and what I don't need. And a lot of the jobs, I did some work at my mother's house. I did some work for some other people that knew I should say knew a family member that I was related to. And a lot of that work was like the first 6 months, and then even after we actually established an LLC, had insurance, did all of that stuff. As soon as we did that, we started taking on slightly bigger projects, but it was still, there was a lot of people who knew somebody that I knew. It wasn't until probably the following year that I started to try to figure out how I could find people that I didn't necessarily know somebody I knew. And that was specifically because while I don't have a problem working for people that, know a relative, it goes back to that idea that, are these your best ideal customers? Or are these customers because you need customers? And I learned very quickly it was because I needed customers to make this work in the beginning. Once I started to establish myself, gain more skills, get a better idea of how to be more efficient and more professional and all of that, I realized very quickly that I needed to have customers that weren't just expecting cheap work. I distinctly remember a conversation with somebody that knew my mom, who they specifically said they wanted me to come over and they wanted me to move some mulch. They had a lot of mulch and they wanted me to move the mulch and put it around trees and edge off a bunch of areas and do this. It was well on the very edge of where I would service for a normal customer, but because they knew my mom, I went and did the work. And in the beginning, there was no issues. They had a certain amount of mulch. I did what I was supposed to do. I got paid what I told them I would get paid. And then we fast forward to the following spring, and what ended up happening was there was a couple of things that happened. That spring, I realized a different way, which I'll get into in another, probably the next video, where I talk about how I found more customers. But I started to find other customers and I started to get busier, and I realized that I was underpricing a lot of the things that I was doing. So I had to raise my prices. And again, I'll talk about prices in the future, but essentially from the time I worked for this person in the summer of one year to the spring of the late spring, early summer of the following year, when I billed them for work. Now, part of it's, and I have no problem admitting this, part of it is my fault because I didn't communicate this, but my rates changed. My rates went from a very specific amount to a slightly higher amount. And when I billed them, they were not happy about the fact that the rates were higher. And I never got the impression that they were going to have an issue with this. Otherwise, I probably would have brought it up. It was more of like they appreciated that I was doing this. My rates went up. I think it was a 30% increase. To give you an idea, it went from $60 an hour to $80 an hour. It didn't go up that much, but that's how much it went up within the first year, because I realized when I was starting at an hourly rate and charging an hourly rate, that's what I was charging. I realized very quickly that that wasn't going to be enough to cover all of the overhead. But like I said, I'll get into that in a future video. But long story short, this person was very upset about the fact that I didn't communicate the rate change. And then when I said, I understand you're upset, I completely admit that I made the mistake of not explaining that the rates went up. And we're talking like a difference of $20 an hour. It was like 4 hours of work. So it was a difference of essentially paying me almost, or 3 or 4 hours of work. So it was essentially paying me like an extra hour of work that they previously weren't expecting. And I can see why that would be a concern. And like I said, I am not saying that I'm innocent in this situation, but what I realized quickly is that their response was not so much about the fact that I didn't communicate it. It's that there's no reason I should be charging that much money. Meanwhile, local landscapers were charging more than, well, probably in the neighborhood of like $120 an hour to do very similar work with, yes, multiple people, but they would end up getting charged about the exact same amount for that size of a project. And their response to me saying, I apologize for not telling you, I will 100% honor the original rate if that's the issue. But just so you know, that's the rate going forward, because I had to raise my prices. And I got a comment from them that I, to this day, will never forget, which was, I could have gotten somebody else to do that work for that same price. Meaning, they were not hiring me because of my price. They were hiring me because of my connection to somebody that they knew. In other words, they knew my mother, and because of that, they gave me the work. And when I got that comment, it kind of like sat in the, like, I can't work for people that know family, because they think that they're helping me. And you're not necessarily helping someone if you're not paying them the rate that you would pay somebody else. If anything, that person is helping you because you're getting a significant discount off of the cost of whatever it is. And that's not right. People can't make a living off of something where if they're charging half as much as the next person, that's not helping them. They're doing work that's significantly cheaper because you're taking advantage of the fact that they're doing it. And I know that's going to not come across always, that's not probably coming across in the best light, but that's the reality of it. You do work for a lot cheaper than what you're valued at or what your industry's valued at, and you're not necessarily helping yourself. And I'll have a whole video talking about doing work at a discounted price for, just because in the future as well, because that's a whole thing. But the idea is that I realized very quickly I needed to switch the types of jobs that I was doing to get away from people that I knew. And I haven't looked back. I still occasionally, honestly, the only person I've done work for that's related to me is my mother. And I don't make her pay, what everybody else pays. Most of the time it's just the materials, because it's just how it is, because there's not a ton of, to be honest, there's not a lot of projects she has, and most of the projects she has, they're projects where I'm like, that's beyond what I can take care of in the time that I have, so you're going to have to get somebody else. And I try to refer to somebody who can get the work done in a timely manner and still get a reasonable cost or a reasonable price. So that's essentially how we started, and the very beginning jobs that I did in the very beginning. But I will say, you have to get away from doing jobs for people you know. I'll talk about how I found jobs in the next video. This week in the field, but the next video I do, I'll talk about how I found other customers and how you can find other customers to grow your business so that you're not needing to have to work for friends and family. It's a great way to start. It's a great way to get your foot in the door and build your skills and your knowledge base, but it's definitely not a place you should stay, especially if you want to grow your business. So with that being said, thank you guys for taking a watch onto this video. I appreciate you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments section. And if you have any things that you'd like to know in relation to how to grow your business, or how something I did in the past. Obviously, I'm early on and we're only a couple videos in when it comes to it. Like I said, I have a bunch of other video ideas, but if there's something you guys specifically want me to cover, please let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, do all those wonderful things that you do with videos. It's much appreciated. And with all that being said, thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you guys next time.